Welcome to the first episode of the Dive Hub Dialogues, where we take a clear-eyed look at the scuba diving industry and occasionally ask the uncomfortable questions. I'm Gary, and I come to you today from the world as an accountant and financial consultant turned dive operator, with a foot in both spreadsheets and saltwater. Today, from the Paradise Beach Club, we're tackling a topic that's quietly shaping the future of diving: the economics of cheap. For years, we've been chasing affordability, trying to make diving more accessible, more appealing, and more mass market. But the truth is, we never had the mass market volume to begin with. And now, with tourism and travel numbers declining globally, the cost of delivering safe, professional, and meaningful dive experiences is rising faster than our pricing models can keep up. Our current demographic, largely older, often cost sensitive, is being asked to carry the financial weight of an entire industry. And that's increasingly expensive to run. That's not sustainable. So today, we're asking, what happens when the numbers stop adding up? And what does a transition away from volumetric pricing actually look like? Joining me is Chris Richardson, founder of Deep Six, Hog, and Edge, and a man who can introduce himself far better than I ever could.
Good morning, Gary. How are you today?
Very, very well in this beautiful location. Sorry if I'm making you jealous.
You're making me jealous. It works. It's working as designed. I am jealous, but I don't have that view. Yeah, I'm glad to join you today and looking forward to talking a little bit about the dive industry. For me, this has been 3 decades now that I've been in the dive industry. I was in the Canadian Navy for 10 years, a little over 10 years as a kid. I joined at 17. I got out at 28. And moved to the Cayman Islands and worked as an instructor there for 5 years. In 2000, I moved to the United States and started working in the dive industry. I was manager of a dive shop in Fort Lauderdale, a big dive shop down there for a little while, and then ended up working for Mars in Decor as a sales rep, and did that for a few years, went to Oceanic, did that for a few years, and also then started up Edge and Hog. Did that for, what did I do that for? 7 years. And now it's been a decade with Deep Six that I started up. So I'm always reaching for that brass ring, I guess, a little bit. On the teaching side, I've been an instructor since 1994. I'm a NAUI instructor, ACUC instructor at one time, an advanced instructor with them. With now I am a course director and a technical instructor evaluator, TDI instructor number 17, so I'm early in that game. And when I was in the Caymans, I crossed over to PADI, and for a while I was also the director for SNSI's North American operations, which is an Italian dive training agency. I've served on the board of NAUI. I've been on the board of the RSTC, the Recreational Scuba Training Council, and the training advisory panel for TDI SDI, International Training. So I've kind of been around a little bit. I've got an interesting and eclectic mix of everything from teaching in Canada as a new instructor, to people that were in the military with me, working in a resort, working in the industry at the retail and on the manufacturing side, as well as keeping myself in the teaching game. Now I normally find myself teaching cave diving probably most often, public safety diving secondly, and then occasional instructor courses and stuff like that. It's been a long time since I taught an open water course, however.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's quite an amazing history, quite an amazing experience. And I'm happy to, proud to have you joining me today as we're talking about a subject which I believe is quite close to your heart, and it's the whole notion behind the pricing and the profitability that's within the dive market, and the idea that the demographics that we're chasing or have been chasing have been moving and becoming more challenging for us. What are your thoughts there?
Absolutely. It's one of those things. I got certified in 1981. I was a teenager, and at the time, the dive industry was really exploding. I was in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and I looked around for the least expensive class. But the truth of the matter is, I looked around, and the cheapest class I could find was with the club at the time for $285. And that was in
Yeah.
1981. If you adjust that to inflation, you're looking at but little over $1,000 today for the course. And that was the least expensive one in town. When I moved to the Caymans, we were a Scuba Pro dealer. We were selling regulators, the Mark 15 and then the Mark 20, right around the $550, $600 range. This is in the 90s. And here we are, it's 2025. And for the price points that I just talked to you about, as far as a regulator is concerned, can you buy a regulator today, Gary?
Yeah, I buy regulators fairly regularly, but actually my last ones were from you. For a good regulator, for the equivalent of a Mark 25, first stage, second stage, you're probably at around $1,000, $1,100 mark, which you're right, doesn't keep up with inflation.
It hasn't kept up with inflation at all. And Scuba Pro has kept up with inflation better than any other brand, other than possibly Atomic. The truth of the matter is, when you look at the price points of 500 or 600, a lot of mid-range, mid-upper range regulators are available in that on inflation adjusted dollar. Now, when you look at training yesterday, I was looking on a website of a dive store, a big dive store that does volume dive store teaching in a big American city. $299 for their open water course. We haven't adjusted for inflation at all. The reality of this is that when you go back to the dive business model, the dive store model, it's always been defined with 5 main business areas: equipment sales, certification, air fills, training, and travel. Our industry has always done the air fills to support their classes and their customers, break even at best, most often a loss because it was their biggest point of investment. Service was done at best break even, just to service their customers, maybe a little bit of profit.
Yeah.
The training was done at a break even point just to get them in the door so that they would buy equipment. Dive travel, I'm sorry, I'm going to say a little bit of a joke. Dive travel by many dive stores, and you're in a resort, you can tell me if this is true or not. I picked up on this when I was in the Cayman Islands. That's the dive store owner wanting to do 3 dives a year that the customer pays for. One of them he takes his wife, one of them takes his mistress, and the third one he takes his wannabe mistress. It wasn't a profit point, and everything was predicated in these 5 areas of business for a dive store. That was what was going to drive the profits for the dive store, and that was really profitable back in the 80s and early 90s, where you had much higher price points in real dollars and higher margins. In 1993 or so, and I bought a 7mm Farmer John suit, and it cost me $600. I can go out today and buy probably 2 of them for $600, not inflation adjusted. So we're talking about a massive difference in the dollars when you start looking at the fact that we haven't kept up with inflation in this industry, and the margins. Now, some of that obviously was the internet made comparison a lot easier. And we had an industry that was really driven by people that were 15 to 20 years older than I am, who came in the 70s, that were true entrepreneurials, adventurous, and unique individuals who grew an industry. And they grew a strong industry, and they made a lot of money, by the way, Gary. They started when they were young. They were in their 20s and their 30s. And they managed to hang on for a long time. And by the time the internet was coming around, they were all the age that I am now. They were at the peak of their power in many ways, but they weren't very likely to change a business plan that would work for 30 to 40 years for them. So we saw a lot of things happen. 20 years ago as a rep, I was going into dive stores and trying to explain to them that the market was changing, and I was just a heretic. I remember my dealers complaining about people coming in with customers coming in with a print off from an online retailer in the early 2000s, 2002 to 2003. And I was telling my retailers, we're only a couple years away, that they're not having to look it up at home. They're going to be pulling it up on their phone.
And that's been a massive change in terms of just the accessibility of information about the products or the services, and being able to rock up to any store knowing exactly what you're doing, but also what they can get elsewhere.
The customer is naturally going to look for the best price. But, this is business 101 stuff, right? People are going to look for the cheapest price by and large. That's where the volume is.
That's been the key thing, is that when you look at the way the industry is structured and the way it's set up, it's all geared around this volumetric pricing. It's all geared around, if we get this large volume, this large group, this large retail presence, we can make some money because it's small money on lots of transactions.
Mhm.
And one of the big things where I'm looking at talking with a lot of dive operations that are out in the destinations, this year in particular, we're seeing 20 to 35% volume declines versus last year. Tourism to Thailand is down 30-35%. To the Philippines is down 20. Out here in the Caribbean, people are talking about 15 to 30% reductions in tourism volume. So if the volume's not there, then it means that the whole pricing structure and the whole pricing model starts to fall apart.
It completely falls apart. My open water course, not only was it $285 in 1981, it was 12 weeks long. We weren't allowed to touch a scuba tank until 6 weeks into it. We were doing 2 nights a week of 3 hours of classroom and 3 hours of pool. It ran until 11 o'clock at night, which was another issue with my parents
Yeah.
because I was a kid. The class that I did was vastly different than anything we offer now. Patty first broke the mold. You know, they really did. They broke the mold. They made it quicker. We saw in a period of a decade classes go down from an average of 6 to 8 weeks to an average of 4 weeks within a decade. And now we're down to the point where we're doing e-learning. It's not uncommon to see 3 to 5 hours of confined water training in total, and then 4 dives that are normally 20 to 30 minutes long, and people aren't as comfortable. Is 3 hours enough? The answer is no. But one of the pushbacks I get is not even necessarily about dive safety or dive education. It's, I can't afford longer in the pool.
And that brings us back onto then the whole idea of pricing and the volumetric model that we've got, where the margins have been squeezed so tight. The question then comes in is, have we made it that we can't afford the safety that we once had, or that we once would consider would be normal? I certainly know in my resort, yes, it's 3 to 4 hours of confined water work, followed by 2 days in the water. And whilst we output good divers, or I believe we output good divers because we do it all neutrally buoyant and we teach neutral buoyancy from the get-go, we do see a lot of students that come in that have qualified that they hit the bottom like an anchor and they can barely move when they're underwater. And so there is a question mark all the time about, in diver education, are we teaching them correctly?
Well, we're absolutely not, Gary. I mean, I was an early proponent of neutral buoyancy teaching. You know, really and truly, it was about 20 years ago, maybe 17, that I started to twig onto the fact that this isn't working really great. And when I was with SNSI, one of the things that I did is I brought neutral buoyancy teaching to the entire agency. So with SNSI, we brought back a training aid. We had a neutral buoyancy training bar, and it works really well. Teaching in neutral is a force multiplier. If you think about it, if I'm teaching a class and I'm only doing 3 hours of confined water training, which isn't enough, Gary, all right, we both know that, but it's the market. If I'm doing 3 hours of training and they're kneeling and I've got 4 students and I'm going in the semicircle from student to student to student doing skills, I'm demonstrating the skills 1/5 of the time, and then I'm watching them each 1/5, each one does 1/5. So each student is developing skills 1/5 of the time that they're in the water. If I have them doing neutral, what percentage of those dives in confined water are they doing skill development?
All of it, because they're practicing buoyancy control the entire time.
Right, they're practicing buoyancy the entire time, and that's the most important thing. Now, it would be great to get on my tech instructor, cave instructor, high horse and tell you, and buoyancy, trim, propulsion. But here's the truth. I want buoyancy first, because buoyancy makes a safe diver. If they've got buoyancy, we can sort out the trim and propulsion as they go. So yeah, teaching neutral is a force multiplier. And it's funny, it's not been a minute. It's over a decade. And
it's absolutely. I remember when I was assisting on an IDC back in 2013, we were having the conversation, myself and the course director, about the push then in 2013 from Paddy to start moving instructor development courses over to neutral buoyancy and teaching neutrally buoyant. We recruited a brand new instructor beginning of this year who literally just passed his IDC in Europe. And I said to him, "Oh, did you do it all neutrally buoyant?" No, here we are in 2025 and he's done his course on his knees.
Correct. And
So how are we progressing? How are we pushing that forward?
we're not progressing. That's the problem. We're not progressing. But the truth of the matter is, we are resistant to change. And this goes back to what I was talking about, the business plans in the early 2000s, where everything in the business plan was predicated to making money on equipment sales. The
Bingo.
internet put a lot of pressure on price points. We were already on the path, well on the path, resisting changing our business model beyond making it shorter, faster, easier, more accessible, with the idea that if our classes were shorter, if the prices were lower, then everybody would dive. Because doesn't everybody dream of scuba diving? No, not everyone dreams of scuba diving. Like that.
And certainly the younger demographic that we're encountering now, who are not into the lifestyle in the same way as you and I would have been back in the day. They're more interested in it as an activity they might do on a vacation, or an activity they might have in a portfolio of activities. So the amount of dollars that we might be able to extract from a client or a consumer that's looking at doing this is infinitely smaller, and the amount of time that they can dedicate to it is infinitely smaller. So the question then comes on to it in terms of, first of all, in our opinion, in your opinion, what has driven that demand for truncated, shorter courses with less focus on the development of skills? You know, is it a case of safety standards have improved enough that we no longer need to be too concerned about those? Or is it that it's all about the dollars and the fact that margins have been squeezed so tight?
It's all about the dollars. Look, equipment's gotten better. Generally speaking, if you look statistically at dive safety, recreational diving, don't pull in technical, don't pull in rebreathers. Let's stick with diving on that reef behind you for a minute and, 10 meters of water. So we've had a lot of safety improvements, BCDs, octopuses, submersible pressure gauges. They have made diving safer. But yet, statistically, we haven't moved one standard deviation off of the same safety number. And the flip side of that is every advancement we have used to shorten the training. Every advancement we have used to try to get more people into the club. The idea that if we're cheaper and faster, everyone's going to learn how to dive is the biggest disservice that we have ever done to the industry. What was our customer back in the 80s and 90s? Who traveled to Grenada or Cayman or the Bahamas when...
It was your affluent upper middle class people. It was your professionals, your relatively well-to-do people. They're the only ones that could afford the travel. They were the only ones who could afford the activity.
Correct, absolutely. Air travel back in the 70s and 80s through to the first half of the 90s was incredibly expensive compared to today. Dive travel was a more affluent demographic. That by itself made it appealing to certain people. For somebody to come back at the golf club or at whatever networking event and talk about their trip that they just did to insert the Caribbean destination.
Luxury destination, yeah.
Yeah, it was a subtle brag. And then on the top of that, if they went diving, wow. You know what I mean? You were diving. As I got to the manufacturing side of this industry, I realized that beating up the suppliers, the OEM and the ODM manufacturers on the price was not just normal, it was constant. And the truth of the matter is we have actually seen a lot of OEM, ODM manufacturers go to business in the last 5 years, as well as brand consolidation that we have seen with, Oceanic into Huey, Aqualung currently just recently acquired by Head.
And I suspect we're going to see a lot more of it as well, because, you look around the industry at so many of the industry players who, because of what we've been talking about, they're not producing or generating the margins that they once would have needed to sustain development.
Correct. Now, the manufacturers used to consistently be able to make the same margins in the same categories as the retailers made. Right now, the manufacturers' margins on hard goods are down around 25 to 32%.
Wow. So when you add in the effective interest rate changes, because of course, most of the manufacturers will be funding their long-term investment in tooling and research and development with debt.
And then
Add in interest rate changes, and you're underwater before
you're underwater
you've got
before you
anywhere.
know it. You're paying your sales rep a 7% commission if you're a major brand, 10% commission if you're a minor brand. You're giving your best accounts terms, net 30, 60, 90. Things like R&D disappear out the window because you're not making money. And no matter how much revenue you have, you're eventually screwed, which is what just happened to Aqualung.
And that's what we're seeing right across the industry, because there's been one of the big things that people have been talking about is over the last 15, 20 years, there's been so little development in product, in new innovation into the industry. And the fact that we're heralding something like a Velo as a breakthrough.
Where are we in our industry? I get it. Everybody's terrified of charging for our services and our products in our industry. We're going to reduce the amount of people coming in. Who's the most terrified, Gary?
So the question mark then comes around to, if we're sitting here contemplating our navels, and we've talked extensively about the challenges the industry's faced over the last 25, 30 years in the time that you've been around. If we're focusing on, let's say, my type of business, destination dive center, what are the things that we need to be focusing on that mean that dive centers out in the islands, dive centers out in the locations where you want to come that have views like this? What is it that we need to be focusing on in order to develop or ensure sustainability for our futures going forward?
Well, I mean, the first thing I would say is that traditionally people have wanted to go on dive vacations to a destination and dive the whole time. All the studies over the last decade have shown us that that's not what everybody wants to do, but yet that continues to be what we market. What's going on in Grenada other than the diving at your location that would be interesting to me or my family or my friends? That's part of it. That means partnering up with other activities and so forth and feeding them customers at the same time they're going to feed you customers. But we're extremely jealous on that stuff, it seems.
You're right there. You're right there.
We don't know how to do it. That's a big part of it. Strictly from the diving point of view, a lot of shops try to be everything to everyone. You want to do tech diving, we'll do tech diving. You want to do snorkeling, we'll do snorkeling. You want to do a reef, we'll do a reef. You want to do an instructor course, we'll do that. Whatever you want, we'll do. I'm a 5-star facility or an instructor development facility. We can do everything for you. And it's expensive to do everything right. And how are you going to do it? Are you going to do it well? Are you going to be superlative at what you do? Are you going to have excellence? And
yeah, and that's the bit that certainly in some other videos I've been putting out on the channel, where it's talking about focusing on what you're good at. And looking at whether that is what's making you money. So I know that for my own business, we don't make that much money on dive training. So therefore, I don't promote it. I don't focus on it. My money comes from taking people out here onto the reefs and the wrecks that we have and enjoying the environment. So therefore, it's recognizing where that is and saying, I'll do training if people want me to train them. They'll pay for it. Because it's got to make me as much margin as taking fun divers out.
Absolutely. You are in the car industry. How many companies have experimented with and discarded a mid-engine vehicle?
Oh, I think over the time, all of them have. I mean,
correct.
Absolutely.
Right. And what's the one brand that sometimes experiments and discards anything but a mid-engine vehicle?
Porsche? No, they're rear engine.
Well, they're mid.
Actually, I mean, you look at it, it's the expensive cars, the likes of a Ferrari or a Lamborghini.
Correct. Some other big brands have made sports cars that are as good as those Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Porsches. There's no question about that. But a Porsche, a Ferrari, a Lamborghini, they are consistently what they are. They market to their demographic and they sell to their demographic. And when you go to go to get an oil change, the $800 for an oil change doesn't bother the demographic because they get coffee and they get shown the latest cars and they get asked if they'd like to upgrade to the latest car. And by the way, here's your latest Porsche key fob. Or it's an experience that makes that customer feel special about themselves. And that's about knowing your demographic and what's because that's not a volume business. The bottom line is we need to define what our demographics are. What is our ideal customer? We have chased after, we tried to make it faster, cheaper, quicker, easier, and the whole world would learn how to dive if we did that. Yeah, we've just tried to, if we just do this, if we're just cheaper, if we hold our price, if we do, we're going to have the whole world dive. The whole world doesn't want to dive. Where do most non-divers over the last 15 years get an impression of what diving is?
From the movies.
No, Shark Week.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
You'd have to be like me or like you, a little different in order for Shark Week to make you think I want to do this. Just like I know cave diving is not a normal thing.
Yeah, no, cave diving's not normal. That is definitely not normal, fella. I'm sorry.
Well, that's the whole thing, though. But you can immediately say that. And I've got some friends that are great instructors that say the same thing to me. We don't question that. I don't turn to you and say, Gary, here's the deal, man. You've said to me a few times now that cave diving's not for you, and you gave it a try. It's not for you. You did your intro class. I don't think you did full class. Why don't we do your full cave class for $100 in 3 hours? Well, I'm asking you, would that make cave diving for you then?
No.
Then why are we doing it with open water diving?
And so this brings me back then to your whole notion that diving is not for everyone. So why are we trying to target everyone? And if what we're saying is that we need to be fixing our margins and fixing our pricing, and therefore making the product work for the entire ecosystem, that at a time like now would suggest that we're going to have to put prices up. What would the conversation be with the market, the consumer, the diver, who's going to complain that diving is already expensive enough?
Gary, this is going to sound a little cold. Does it matter?
For those people who are feeding on the teat of volume and who have been so attached to the 200, 300, 400 divers that we can get through in a month, yeah, it is going to matter to them until we can adjust to a different model.
Transition is going to be painful for the industry if it occurs, but it won't be as painful as a complete and utter collapse that doesn't recover.
And that I think is the fundamentals. If we see the volume declines in tourism to destinations like this carrying on, if the speculation and the assumptions that have been made in the financial markets about this ongoing economic downturn that we're experiencing and have been experiencing since at least 2020, the question mark will be how many of the organizations out here providing diving services can survive if we want to continue to offer cheap products. I know cheap is relative, but cheap products at less margin than we can afford to run it.
Correct. And at the end of the day, there's going to be two survivors, Gary. One is going to be the shop that is putting property or profit centers into everything that they're doing. They might come out smaller, but they'll be okay. The other one is a little bit more complicated. It's a little bit like the poor person that owns the property that they're living on and the house that they're living on because they inherited it from their parents. All they have to do is make property taxes and pay their electrical.
Yeah.
So somebody that has a situation with very, very low fixed cost might be able to survive this, but that's barely a living. It's not a living that you can invest in anything. You can't even invest in a family.
It's more of a side hustle that you can afford to run if you're retired or run if you're we see a lot of instructors who will have these side hustles at a weekend because they're interested in it. But you're right, it's not a business. It's not something that you can sustain a living off of.
And I'm privileged. I've made a living for 3 decades in this industry.
The youngsters that would be coming into the industry now, we all accept that they have to be in the industry for a couple of years as they enjoy themselves and then go on and get a proper job, or they come into it later in life having already made their money. The old saying that we hear all the time, how do you get $1 million out of diving? Well, you start with $2 million, which suggests that we all know the business model is upside down. We all know the business model is broken, and it's going to take some big cojones and some big assistance, I think, some big direction that allows dive operators to start to realize how we need to run our business. Because one of the things I've certainly seen is, in terms of the conversations I have with dive center owners, we have some fantastic people in this industry, some really passionate divers, some really people who love the ocean environment, but they are not business people. And so they undervalue the service that they provide all the time. They undervalue, they don't like to charge too much because they're always looking about, and it's something that you've said to me many times, they're looking at, here's what the value I think it is, as opposed to here's what the value you think it is. And so they try to cheapen the product because it's, what's my time worth? What am I worth? And as a result, we perpetuate this myth. And You hit the nail on the head a few moments ago when you said it's about making sure that every activity we do is a profit center. If we are offering servicing, we have to make a margin on that servicing. Otherwise, why would we dedicate the time to it? If we're doing tank fills, let's make sure we're making a margin on those tank fills. Otherwise, why are we doing it?
Well, I mean, not only that, that's one of the high risk areas, isn't it? How many people have had a tank blow up while filling or a storage tank blow up and injure people and horrible human cost and tragedy? And then on top of that, let's put our MBA hat on for a minute and saying, well, it's expensive. Lawsuits are expensive. Settlements are expensive. Disruption to your business is expensive. All of that is expensive. Replacing your most expensive piece of kit that you have to buy as a store, your compressor. So yet we're willing to fill up a tank at a loss just so people can show up. I mean, it's insane. You said earlier about the industry. Oh, we seem to attract, young people that are taking basically a gap year for a couple of years to have fun, or retired people that have no real need and they just want to do it for fun. Why are we calling ourselves an industry if we can't offer anybody a career?
And that's it. It's not, in that regard, you're absolutely right. This is not something where you can set yourself up and work and transition through it as a industry.
Can, but it's sure harder than it should be. We can't offer careers to most people, it seems. We don't value ourselves enough for other people to value us. I don't know how we change it other than education, but that's a pop-out. If I was truly honest on how we change it, we look forward to the cleansing fire.
Ouch.
We look forward to capitalism doing what capitalism does, and you position yourselves to be there at the other side of that.
And so in that regard, do you see the impending change in our industry and effectively the forced requirement for us to change our demographics and to become more professional and more, dare I say, commercial? Do you see it as an inevitability?
I would say yes, it has to. For a variety of reasons. Number one is we are truly at risk, particularly in the United States with the tort situation in the U.S., of being in the same position as general aviation in the 70s and 80s, where the insurance companies make content. That drives prices higher and the requirement for professionalism higher. As a self-regulated industry, have we done a good job? No, we haven't done a good job. And right now, you'll see the training agencies are all up in the ISO stuff because the RSTC, it doesn't matter anymore. ISO is where it's at. The agency is really working hard to shape those standards to what they want to do, be they high or low. It's funny, with rebreathers, it might be one way. With recreational diving, it's the other. The truth of the matter is, as the industry participates in that, ISO is law in many countries. They're going to be putting laws in place. And then the next logical question is, there are ISO standards. Are those ISO standards being followed by the dive centers, by the dive instructors? The answer is going to be no. So that is going to force some of this. So tort in the US, ISO, actually in the third world, they're going to get tired of the deaths. They kind of have been accepting of the idea, a little bit of almost British common law of, well, you got killed doing something risky. What did you expect? But that only goes so far. There's going to be some professionalism that's going to have to come, even if it's forced upon us.
So you see it as it's likely that if we don't regulate ourselves and we don't professionalize ourselves, then it's going to get forced on us by the implementation of ISO standards, whether it be through training agencies pulling it in, or more importantly, governments adopting international standards, because they're looking at the quality, they're looking at the injuries, they're looking at the fatalities and saying, we have to hold the diving industry to a higher standard.
Absolutely. And you're seeing in other ways too. I mean, Malta with the criminal stuff.
Yep, that's true. Yeah, that was a big one.
They're trying to send the message, we've got an eye on you, dive industry. You're going to stop being cowboys. It goes back to the demographics. How can we afford to do things correctly? We can't afford AEDs. It's a reality. The small dive shop can't afford an AED everywhere. These are real problems. We can't afford safety. We can't, we have to start putting margin back in. We have to be able to give people careers. We have to be able to give people the experience they want. We have to be able to provide the safety they need. And we have to make margin to do all of that.
And I think that's the fundamental, which is the question mark is always going to be how. How do we do that? And transitioning from this position where we are right now, where, as we've alluded to, we can't price in the safety, we can't price in maintenance. There's a dive operator here that effectively went bust because it couldn't continue to maintain its products. Its prices were so low, its margins so low. When equipment started to fail, it couldn't replace. And we have to make sure that as an industry that we're reflective of that. And when I say as an industry, I mean as a destination industry, not necessarily as a training or a retail industry. But we have to reflect that if the price of a 2-tank dive goes from $100 to $200, it's because we need to price it at that price in order to affect the safety requirements that are in there.
Absolutely. Look, you and I talked not very long ago. Part of leading to us doing this today is I asked you how much you're charging for a 2-tank dive. It's the same amount of money that I was charging in 1996. Not the same amount of money inflation adjusted.
No, the same dollar number.
The same dollar number, which means there is no inflation adjustment.
In the 15 years I've been here, I would say that we've only priced maybe half of inflation, whereas our cost of operating has gone much, much more than that. And so margins are a lot tighter now than they were. I mean, my best year from a margin perspective was 2016.
It's not sustainable, Gary. You know that. That's why you're having these discussions with me or with other dive centers. You're trying to figure it out. The truth of the matter is, has this cheaper, faster, the world will learn how to dive if we just do that? Has it worked? Have we doubled the amount of divers? Have we tripled them or quadrupled them? You're less busy now than you probably have been in a long time. I'm hearing that from resorts as well. There are less divers actively diving right now than before, and we made it easier and cheaper than it ever was. So is that the answer? No. Do we lose some divers if we start to upmarket ourselves? Yes, we do. But are they good customers? And a good customer, just because they're not a good customer, they're not a good person. They are probably good people. It's just the reality of it is that we are not profitable as an industry. And if we're not profitable as an industry, we can't deliver safety, the experience, nor the careers. We can't do any of that, which goes with the career thing. Like, what are we going to be? An itinerant industry of drifters? And people do want professionalism, but they're not willing to pay for it because we weren't willing to express what our value was.
To sum it all up, and I've seen that, and Raquel, my wife, and I were talking about this last night. We were talking specifically about dive operations in the Philippines. And there's a location there where there are 2 dominant dive operations, and they premium price versus all of the other operations. Yet you see the recommendations for that location. If anybody asks, I'm wanting to dive in, it's Darwin was the location. And almost every single recommendation that anybody gives is for these 2 premium price locations. And so as I sit back and I kind of go, actually, the market is prepared to pay for good quality. It's prepared to pay for good service. Why don't we acknowledge that?
There's a reality of it as well. I mean, I hate to talk about class. I hate to talk about that, but we're talking demographics. And there's self-validation and also networking that a certain demographic is always in pursuit of.
Yeah.
With being on the boat with everyone from the plumber to the teacher to the nurse to the lawyer, well, the lawyer's the outlier. Next time that lawyer is going to be on a boat with other lawyers and dentists and doctors. And that's the reality. For the same reason you wore your Submariner when you were a banker. Because, I had the Omega in Cayman. I was wearing a Seiko every day because the Seiko was a tougher watch.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, I hate to say it. We're chasing the wrong demographics. Those are not the divers you're looking for.
And I think that is the summation that we need. That is the recognition that we need to chase the divers we want, chase the divers that will allow us to continue to sustain this industry, and accept that there are going to be some people who maybe, as you said, great people, lovely people, really good divers. But if they want cheap diving, we can't afford to sustain them.
If you can't afford to put your divers in the water with a videographer to give them pictures and videos that they can share on social media, what are you even doing? It's 2025. You have a choice. You can offer that as an additional service that they pay for, or you can price it into what you do. And if you make the answer, well, the instructor will do it, I'd like to strangle you because the instructor needs to be instructing. The bottom line is, though, is this something that we should not be pricing into what we're doing now?
And that fundamentally is what came into my pricing video a couple of weeks ago, which is that we need to be, rather than pricing up for the bare minimum commoditized product, we need to be making it memorable. We need to be making it personal, and we need to be making it special. And if we can do all of that and we can wrap it all up with a price point that earns us the margins that we need, that we deserve, that price is in for the safety, the price is in for the downtime, the specialism that we have, the equipment that we're required to have, then we can price in for sustainability in this industry. Okay, Chris.
Thank you.
This has been an absolute pleasure. It's going to be a really interesting video, and it's been absolutely fascinating having you join me for this conversation. I've enjoyed all the conversations that we've had, and I look forward to our next conversation.
So, where does that leave us? If the numbers don't work and the volume isn't coming, then maybe it's time we stop chasing cheap and start building value. That doesn't mean pricing people out. It means being honest about what it costs to do this well and finding the audience that sees the worth in it. We're not saying the dive industry is broken, but what we are saying is it's stretched. And if we want to thrive, we need to stop pretending that the old model still fits. That means rethinking pricing, rethinking product, and rethinking who we're actually trying to serve. Thank you for joining us on this first episode of the Dive Hub Dialogues with Chris. And if you've got any thoughts, pushback, or your own war stories from the front lines of dive economics, we'd love to hear them. You can find us at thedivehub.com or hit us on Instagram and YouTube. We'll be back soon with more conversations that challenge, provoke, and helpfully help you build a better destination dive business that actually works. Until then, stay sharp, stay salty, and don't be afraid to charge what you're worth.